Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everegg's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back this week with some brief market updates, a big update for GDT event number 367, bit of trade, and of course, chat of the week.
Very good. Yes, as you say, brief market update because there's a fair update in the GDT. We'll talk about a few things outside that. So the action, as always lately, is the EU butter market, which continued to firm 3 to 5% in the past week. And that looks quite strong out there in Q1 still, where solid gains last week really were most of the action. Futures are trading ahead of where the over-the-counter business is, but interestingly, GDT for European product at this event, which we'll talk about in a minute, was actually ahead of the futures. So trades either way. The market doesn't believe much is going to change soon. Cream is solid at €10 a kilo. Spot milk is still firming and spot butter is again rising. But futures curve suggests some loosening coming, but not the usual seasonal crash in cream prices we expect to see.
Yeah, well, it's a lot less interesting on the skim milk powder side, Steve. So we just saw some firming in the futures over the last week. It seems like there's just a bit of covering of needs, nothing earth-shattering that's changed. It's well above spot prices where the EX futures are settling at the moment. Bit of faith maybe creeping in that there's some better news out of China and that Asian demand might be a little bit better going forward.
So GDT 367 has a lot of information. It's a wacky-looking chart, and we'll talk about that butter line soon. Overall up nearly 5%. It's the best lift since August. And this time, we don't have a negative bar on this particular summary chart because we had increases in all but one of the mozzarella products, which we don't cover in this chart, and lactose fell. Demand overall was better than average. We had a reduced offering of milk powder, the two major milk powders this time. And in the mix there, in the results, this is an average chart. We've got some EU butter prices and whole milk prices, which each went up. They're also included in those averages. Our GDT wrap has the detail of what occurred when you strip those out. But that C1 butter is not a misprint. And I initially thought, there's a European product changing there, but it's actually the fact that most of that is due to C1 New Zealand contract going back above 8,000 because of some short cover needs.
Yeah, as you say, Steve, demand pretty much stronger across the board. Buyers hanging in a little longer in skim milk powder and whole milk powder, and I know you'll have one of your favourite demand charts to talk about in a little bit. Short-term coverage is really evident in that butter demand chart. They're very strong for those early contracts. And in the last 2 weeks, people coming back to GDT with a hiatus of 2 weeks with any fat available on an auction platform, they've seen the EU rebound. They may have expected that those prices would be softening by now, but obviously there's people that have come back and had to secure that short-term cover. So, some interesting dynamics there, Steve, especially around the fat piece.
Yeah.
On Pulse, just comparing these results at this event, for whole milk powder, it was actually 1.5% up against the Pulse event last week and a 4.7% improvement on the contract to period at the previous GDT. So pretty healthy curve there for whole milk powder. Whole milk powder sales to China this time were actually down on the previous event and the lowest in 6 events. So a little bit less volume, a little bit less demand from China, but overall enough to push that price up at this event. The Middle East actually came back even at this higher price, which was enough to push that price higher. And just looking at this whole milk powder discount to butter and skim, a little smaller this time. In fact, it was the smallest discount for 20 events, just around those dynamics. Now, looking at skim milk powder. Skim milk powder was actually down $10 a tonne from last week's Pulse event, but it was up 3.6% from the previous GDT auction.
looking at, as you said, one of my favourite charts. But this tells a bit of a story because while the starting demand, this looks similar for whole milk as well. But I thought I'd only include one. I know you love them so much. But this is the round by round demand ratio, which showed this eked out to 22 rounds for skim milk powder. So it started okay, but just held on. And naturally, if it's above that 1.0 line there, you're going to get a lift in price. And it certainly was enough to push it up.
And just now looking at skim milk powder sales, China actually accounted for 2/3 of the volume at this event. Again, a little bit less volume available, not quite the outcome of a few events ago. We don't have the access there, but that's metric tons secured. So a little bit less than a few events ago, more than the latest event, but, pretty encouraging in terms of skim milk powder demand for China.
So where does it leave us, Jo?
Yeah, looking at the skim milk powder comparisons, the GDT versus the various futures curves, there's some forward convergence going on here. The US is almost dead flat. We've still got very low stocks, but also very subdued demand domestically. New Zealand futures are still well ahead of the GDT results, sort of, lining up more with the other futures markets there, Steve.
With the forward butter comparison, this looks a little more bizarre than ever, really, with those, almost convergence at the start, with that very high result we saw at this event. But the strength of the European market has kept the gap above the AMF butter equivalent, certainly well above where it is, given the ride. Both have risen, but the European market is stronger.
And then just looking at mozzarella here, Steve, it's interesting given the wider market dynamics in Europe at the moment, but mozzarella on the GDT platform just steadied at around $4,600 a tonne, and that's the average of the Danish and Belgian product. Cheese prices in the EU are just starting to rise again, so that sort of tracks, doesn't it?
Yeah, with that butterfat moving back up, it's going to put some upward pressure here.
Mm-hmm.
So US trade data came out overnight for us, and just in summary, the trends are pretty consistent with where they've been. In MSE terms, milk solids equivalent, up 13%. That's the 8th month of consecutive growth. Skim non-fat up with pretty healthy demand coming out of Southeast Asia and Mexico. Mexico starting to go again. Cheese, the growth rate is slowing. We've seen a pretty strong price rise in the US. They may be certainly dampening the growth rate year on year into Mexico, but still some strong growth into Latin American regions. Dry whey posted its best tonnage in 18 months. Again, China picking up volume, and the best gains were in absolute terms into that market. WPC 80, the first time in 13 months we saw a dip. Lactose was also weaker. And look, that butter percentage looks pretty impressive, but the lift there is only 450 tonnes, such a small volume. So pretty mixed bag across the board when we look at that. And Jo, you're going to bring us home with another interesting chart.
Yeah, we're back in China, Steve, for this week's Chart of the Week. And we've got some anecdata from BOABC. It's always very hard to be sure about the data that we're getting out of China, but this is showing that milk production was down 7% in September and down 4.2% for the September quarter. Milk processing was down 3% in September, but up 1% in the third quarter, that September quarter. So some interesting dynamics there, Steve. You've been looking at some of the company reporting out of China as well.
Yes, I've been digging into the results of the largest processor, Yili, who claims to be winning market share in the market. However, milk sales in Q3 in revenue terms were down 10%. Now, the volume loss is around about 8%. There's a 2% loss in milk price quarter to quarter, roughly. So that would suggest that not all of that loss is in volume terms. And when you line that up against, so as the largest player, that's probably indicative of where the market is, if not a little better than the market, would indicate instead of a powder stockpile building, we've actually got a UHT stockpile building. That's probably pretty impressive by now, given that sales are well below what they're actually making into product. So just a sobering little snippet there. Things aren't out of the woods yet in China. Well, that's all from us this week. We'll be back in next week. Thanks for watching.